Manchester United now, Stefan, is a personal vanity project that is very close to Jim Ratcliffe's heart.
You can do the maths on the back of a fact packet. If you've got average wages of £50,000 per person, it takes a lot of redundancies of £50,000 people. We need to be very careful what we wish for in terms of these stadiums.
The infrastructure at Blackburn while I was there was probably one of the best I experienced. Unfortunately, after the Venkies arrived, that infrastructure left.
Are you going to be planning to head back into management at all?
Somebody, if they are willing to take an old experienced guy, unlike me now, then, you never know. Never say never, they say.
Hello and welcome to How Football Works. I'm Olly Clink. In the hot seat with me today is football finance expert Stefan Borson and journalist, talkSPORT's very own Ben Jacobs. Gentlemen, great to have you along. Let's get going, shall we? Here we go again. Manchester City are challenging the Premier League rules. It's to do with associated party transactions. You might remember that phrase. So what exactly is it this time? Because it seems there are multiple challenges between the Premier League and City at the moment. Stefan, because these things can be so complex, we're going to try and do these as quick fire questions. So yes or no answers where applicable. So first of all, does this challenge have anything to do with the 115 charges?
No.
Okay. Are City at risk of being docked any points or penalties here?
No.
Doing very well here so far. Wasn't there an APT ruling last year? What's changed?
So this follow-on is about the subsequent rules that came from the first decision. But there's a little bit of a wrinkle there because the first decision is not complete yet. We've only had the initial partial decision, and the follow-on hearing was held last week, and we would expect to see the final confirmation of what the APT1 decision looks like. APT2 is about the changes that were made on the back of the partial hearing. City say they were rushed through. The Premier League say they weren't rushed through and they were perfectly good. But City say, no, we don't agree that those new rules are lawful, so we want to challenge those as well.
So just in terms of that partial hearing, it's fair to say City won that case?
Yeah, well, they won certain aspects of that case. The Premier League will say that they also won certain aspects of the case in that they successfully defended the concept of associated party transaction rules. So I think the Premier League would argue that that was a win for them. City definitely got a decision that the rules were unlawful. The extent of the unlawfulness and whether it makes all of the associated party transaction rules null and void is the thing that's still outstanding in APT1, and we'll hear about that in the next few days. APT2 is very specifically around the changes that were made in November and December to the rules. City say, hang on a minute. First of all, we needed to wait for the decision from APT1. Secondly, once we've made those changes, we need to know whether they're actually lawful as well. So is the whole regime effectively unlawful and therefore we need to start from scratch, or can we just sort of adjust here and adjust there to try and get them to comply with competition law?
So you talk about those changes back in November and December. Which clubs voted to approve those amendments?
Well, most of the clubs voted to approve them. It looked like it was going to be quite tight. We know that you need a 2/3 majority of those that vote, and it ended up being 16-4. City, Aston Villa, Nottingham Forest, and Newcastle, from memory, were the teams that voted against the changes. And really, they weren't saying there can't be any changes, period. That the general idea that was in correspondence from both City, and we also saw the Aston Villa letter leak out into the media, the concept was very simply, let's just wait for the full APT decision. It will then give us all the clarity that we need in terms of what that decision looks like, whether all of the APT regime is unlawful. If it is, then we all need to go back to the drawing board from scratch. If we can just tweak certain things, then that's what we should do. But in essence, let's just wait for the final determination of that APT tribunal. The league said, no, we'd like to put some changes to the clubs. That's what they did. And that carried in, and they were implemented in early December after approval by the FA. So we'll see. City say that those new rules are also unlawful.
And so those clubs, Forest, Villa and Newcastle, still supporting Manchester City in this case?
Well, we think so. I mean, it's less relevant as to who's supporting them, because ultimately the case is Manchester City versus the Premier League in an arbitration under what's known as Rule X of the Premier League rules, and it will go to a tribunal. That tribunal, the parties have agreed, should be constituted to be the same as the tribunal that looked at the first APT case. So there'll be continuity and they won't have to explain the situation and it'll be joined up. But unfortunately, because of the way the jurisdiction works of the first tribunal, they couldn't consider the second set of questions all in the same tribunal. So in many ways, it's not a major development in that it's just a continuation, but it delays, again, the final outcome of this APT dispute.
One more question on this. How much has this cost Manchester City and the Premier League?
Yeah, so it's more of a legal heavy dispute as opposed to a kind of evidential and documentary type dispute. There was a few witness statements that were given within the City hearing, but generally it was about the lawyers arguing quite technical parts of competition law. That will be a bit cheaper because, first of all, the hearing will have been shorter. You won't have to have left loads of space for cross-examination of witnesses. You will have had a lot of submission from the two sets of barristers. So that will have been a sort of cost saving. However, these competition law barristers are some of the most expensive around. And furthermore, quite big teams that the parties had. And very, very high quality law firms involved. So I would think you're probably looking £1 to £2 million per party for the APT hearings. So not insignificant, but not as much as the big 115 case or even the Everton case on PSR.
Stefan, magnificent job, as always an education as well. If we look at the other side of Manchester, though, Sir Jim Ratcliffe hasn't done any more favours for his PR overnight, with his Ineos pals wielding further cuts to Manchester United staff with up to 200 jobs to go. It comes after Ratcliffe made 250 of the 1,150 workforce redundant in July. And it's not just United who are feeling the pinch. The All Blacks are also suing Ineos after the chemicals company failed to pay its sponsorship agreement to New Zealand Rugby this year. Ben Jacobs, firstly, welcome to the show. I mentioned that PR there. More job losses for Manchester United. We'll get into the reasoning behind them in just a moment. But just firstly, from that perspective of how this looks, again, it just doesn't feel like the right thing to be doing when we've seen so many millions spent on getting managers, losing managers and transfers as well.
Yeah, I think it's that age-old point, isn't it, that some of the redundancies or cost-saving measures at a club like Manchester United feel so small comparative to the money that either is spent on adding a player or paying a player's wages, but they are two different departments. And what Jim Ratcliffe and Ineos are looking to do at the moment is sort of align Manchester United's culture with that of Ineos, and to do so, they have to be very ruthless in a business sense. So if, as expected, we get a further 200 redundancies, that will be the second round of redundancies at Manchester United. And Ratcliffe's point is relatively simple from a business perspective, and that is he has invested about £250 million into the club, or $300 million US. And what he feels at Manchester United in terms of what he's inherited is there is a financial and business infrastructure that sees that money swallowed up with various costs. And if he can start removing some of what he would consider deadwood, and that's no disrespect, of course, to those that unfortunately will lose their job. It's just from a functional perspective, he feels the business can be leaner and meaner and streamlined. And in doing that, if he can effectively use the money he invests into the club in a more productive way, it won't just get swallowed up. And that is why these redundancies are happening.
Well, it's interesting, actually, Stefan, because if you look at the figures, if we are a bit cynical about this, Manchester United at the moment have 1,112 staff. Manchester City, by comparison, have 520. When you look at it like that, and Ben mentions there streamlining, and Jim Ratcliffe looking at this and saying actually he doesn't feel that his money is being used in the right way, does it make a bit more sense?
Well, you have to be slightly cautious when you compare the numbers in the accounts in terms of employees. In terms of the City situation, they're part of a bigger group, and you have some of the central functions of the City Football Group being performed at a different level, but with services being provided. So the cost of those services will be elsewhere in the profit and loss account. So the headline number doesn't always replicate. Likewise, certain clubs outsource their catering. Now, of course, if you've got people who are serving food, that's quite a number of people who you would have on the payroll versus another club that outsources the whole operation. And again, the costs would appear differently in the profit and loss. The other big issue that INEOS have got from a public perspective and also from an internal perspective in terms of removing hundreds of people from United is that ultimately in any football club, the vast majority of the wage spend, something like 80% in that sort of order, is in terms of the first team squad and the coach. So in terms of pounds and pence, it might, on a metric, it may look better to have 800 staff rather than 1,000, but it's not going to reduce the wage bill materially. Most of that wage bill is still going to be on the first team. I think that the reality, and we'll see it over the next couple of years, but I think the reality is that INEOS have a belief that the wage bill overall, and I include the first team squad in this, is simply too high, and that they can operate on a wage bill much closer to the Tottenham level, sort of £225–250 million, and much less.
Well, that's gone well for Tottenham, though, hasn't it?
Well, it has, and I think that's going to be the interesting sort of question that we find. But if you look at what's happened with United and the players that they're trying to move out, so Rashford, Sancho, Casemiro, these players are going to go, over the next, well, some of them have gone, and then the rest of them are going to go over the next 18 months. These are going to be the last group, really, of very expensive, underperforming players. And I think whether then you look at the players that are coming in to replace them, they're clearly on much lower salaries than the players going out. So I think the direction of travel at United is to get the wage bill very materially down and then build back up. And I think they're probably looking at it and going, well, we need to do that both in the operational sense, in terms of the non-football cost base, but also on the football side.
Just to add as well briefly to that, we have to understand that Manchester United now, Stefan, is a personal vanity project that is very close to Jim Ratcliffe's heart. So he's got the sort of nous and the ruthlessness of INEOS, but it's his own money. And I think that, for me, is the most fascinating thing, that Manchester United was Glazers and debt, and they're still there with that infrastructure. And yet, for Ratcliffe, it's his own funds. So finding a way to make them productive and not just swallowed up in the infrastructure that he has inherited is a lot more personal to him than some other owners.
Yeah. Should that be a worry for Manchester United fans, do you think? You mentioned there about it being this vanity project for Ratcliffe.
Well, I think it's got positives and negatives. The positive is clearly that he means business and he wants quick change. I think sometimes, as we've seen with Chelsea and Clearlake Bowley, if you move too fast in changing a strategy, a culture, an infrastructure, a financial plan, then the fruit of that labour cannot be apparent in that first year or two, and it can feel like there's a lot of instability. And for example, at Manchester United, Dan Ashworth coming in and then leaving, Erik ten Hag having a review over the summer and then being sacked, it all feels like the ambition is sky high, but the infrastructure and the strategy is taking a little bit more time. But the fact that Ratcliffe is personally invested in it should suggest a more hands-on culture with accountability. That's the upside. The downside is the fact that it's such a big change from how the Glazers were running the club, even though ironically they're still there. It might take a little bit of time for things to settle down.
the one thing that sort of I think we need to just keep an eye on as observers of the situation is, can you effectively put in place a private equity chemicals business type thought process and approach, which is very much around the very specific metrics and gross margin measures and all of the sort of very conventional business metrics, and then you go into a people business, which is very different from a chemicals and a petrochemicals business. You're dealing with a lot of human beings in a football club, and it is different from a chemicals business. And it will be interesting to see whether the two cultures that he's trying to mesh together, whether they work, and whether you can achieve what he wants to effectively on a much lower cost base. Because nobody's managed it historically in the Premier League. Nobody has cracked it except from the one exception that proves the rule in Leicester City. Nobody has managed to have sustained success with a very, very tight cost base.
Just very briefly, Ben. Obviously, Manchester United have said that the money that they are saving from losing these jobs is going to be put towards funds for the first team. So can we expect this summer Ruben Amorim to have this big war chest? He talks so much about needing new players. They've made January signings as well. They have lost players, of course, but can we expect him to be able to spend big this summer?
The bad news for Manchester United fans is that there's no real correlation between this and transfer kitty. Manchester United are, I think, walking quite a tight line as far as PSR are concerned, but it's not to say they won't be able to spend anything, and therefore the summer is likely to see Ruben Amorim backed in some capacity. But what we have to understand is that the Ratcliffe investment of that $300 million and the redundancies and the cutting of costs around ambassadors and what they're paid and all the other, what most fans would consider little cuts, but done at increasingly high volume, all of that is saving money that's going to be put not into a transfer kitty, but into infrastructure. So that's where the Carrington redevelopment in particular will ultimately be funded by some of this cost saving.
I mean, you can do the maths on the back of a fact packet. If you've got average wages of, for the sake of discussion, £50,000 per person, it takes a lot of redundancies of £50,000 people.
It's now time for our talkSPORT Explainer. This is the part of the show where our panellists try and make sense of the question on everybody's lips. And right now, that is, are we on the brink of a new stadium arms race in the Premier League? The Telegraph exclusively revealed last week that Newcastle United are leaning towards building a completely new ground next to St James's Park. The board are reportedly getting closer to recommending a £1.2 billion new home to the Saudi Arabian ownership that would house just under 70,000 fans. St James's Park at the moment, 52,000 in capacity. This comes after Manchester United are set to start a regeneration of the Trafford area. Everton are about to unveil Bramley Moor Dock, and Arsenal are looking to expand the Emirates to an 80,000 capacity too. So Ben, right now, is a new stadium more popular than a new striker?
Well, let's be clear. Arsenal need a new striker rather than a stadium expansion, but both would be nice, of course. I think what we are seeing is, in this digital age, stadium development is moving incredibly fast, and your ability, therefore, to bring in revenue through your stadium is very different, for example, to if we go all the way back to Euro 96. And even if you have redeveloped or built a relatively new stadium 10, 15 years ago, you start to look around at what is developing globally and think it can get outdated very quickly. So now clubs are starting to say, can we sell more tickets? Can we provide better fan engagement? Can we be more digitally orientated? Can we make the stadium a hub in the community? Can it have things like hotels and accommodation? And then perhaps most interesting in the case of Manchester United, is there any way of working with the local council and the government? And is there a possibility, we don't yet know in the case of Manchester United, that the government might actually pay for it? And of course, if the funding can come via government, you're going to get clubs in big cities like Newcastle being a prime example, saying if the government are part funding Manchester United's redevelopment, then can we get in on this act as well? But I think the other factor in all of this, why we're seeing so many clubs move in this direction, is because financially there's a realization that the revenue can come if you've got a world-class stadium, if you've got a hub, if you've got the best in your area, or ultimately in the UK, you can be bringing in non-football revenue, staging music concerts. And the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, I think, led a series of other rivals to look at that, its infrastructure, its multi-purpose ability, its revenue streams from concerts, from racing. And they said, wow, if the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium can do that, we need to get in on the act now. Otherwise, from a financial point of view, we're going to fall behind.
The thing is, though, from a lot of fans' perspectives, and some Tottenham fans as well, they start to view their club purely as a business. They sometimes feel that the football side is lost. I've seen Tottenham fans put up and say, look, everything here is mentioned apart from the football. You've got the NFL, you've got the concerts, nowhere is mentioned the football. Are we, worried potentially about the football side of things being lost and clubs purely looking at this as a way to make money?
Well, I think all the clubs have got to be careful about the scale of the spending on the infrastructure that ultimately will only be filled if there's a product on the pitch that people want to see. And it's far from clear that we're in a position where we're looking after the fans that are coming through. You look at the average age of the fans coming through the gate, and it's getting older and older. And that's not going to improve if you've got, yes, it will improve if you've got a better facility, but ultimately it's got to be paid for. And if we are just going to drive ticket prices through the roof by everybody investing in £1 billion, £2 billion stadiums, and by the way, they seem to be the only infrastructure projects that seem to be talked about in terms of the entire country at the moment, which seems a crazy situation to me. When we can't at the moment even get a train to go from Manchester to London after full time at the Etihad, for example, between two of our biggest cities. So it seems to me that there's an over interest in infrastructure projects around football clubs and football stadiums right now. And not enough creativity in terms of thinking about how those projects can actually improve the areas. I think it's very easy to say, let's build another Wembley of the North. But nobody believes that another, a big stadium at Old Trafford is a Wembley of the North. If you're in Leeds or you're in Newcastle, it's a Wembley of Manchester maybe, but it's not a Wembley of the North. And so I think there are big issues in terms of just thinking that you build a stadium and they will come. Ultimately, I do believe it's about the product on the pitch. And if these teams have not got the product on the pitch, they will not fill those stadiums.
I want to revisit that Wembley idea in just a moment, but it's interesting you say about the product on the pitch, because I think a huge part of that is also atmosphere. If you look at St James's Park, Ben, and you look at the recent League Cup semi-final, Newcastle against Arsenal, the atmosphere for that game was out of this world. It was brilliant. Newcastle fans roaring their team on in that game. Is there a worry that moving to a new stadium, the phrase that gets bandied around a lot is soulless bowl, isn't it? Is there a worry that could happen, or do you think that fans need to accept that a move like this is inevitable?
Well, first of all, I think you could put the Geordies anywhere and they'd make a fantastic atmosphere. But I take your point. Certain stadiums are more claustrophobic. They're more culturally aware of what the club stands for. But nowadays, I think the design of stadiums are more diverse and they are more in tune with what a fan base wants and expects. Whereas perhaps when we first saw a big new wave of Premier League stadiums that ended up supplanting for things like England games outside of London or potentially music concerts, the likes of the Riverside, Pride Park, the King Power Stadium, when they all arrived, people were saying, but what about Elland Road? What about Hillsborough? They're the ones we remember from the mid-90s. They're the ones with the character and the kind of culture, and we expect big games there rather than, as you say, in these bowls where the design was the same and the colour of seats just changed. Now I think it's a bit different. And if you look at the character and personality within the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, I don't think many Spurs fans are saying they preferred White Hart Lane. I don't think there's many Arsenal fans, sentimentally, yes, but practically in terms of fan engagement, no, that would say Highbury was better than the Emirates Stadium. And why? Because the new stadiums now are aware of what the fan base want visually in a stadium: fan engagement, catering, food, club shop, access. So I think stadium design is now not about a one-size-fits-all. And if a club is to build a new stadium, they're making sure that they consult the fan base, and that will include some kind of back and forth over things like design. So I would expect the new Manchester United Stadium, if they go down that route, a new St James's Park, if they develop it, or if they build one behind it, which seems to be their preference. I think the look and feel of these kind of stadiums now will be far more diverse and far more palatable if these teams move away to their fan bases.
And Stefan, just very quickly, just going back to that Wembley idea, because Manchester United aren't the only team to use that moniker. Recently, the Birmingham owners have also said they want to build the Wembley of the Midlands as well. They want to upgrade St Andrews, build a new stadium, new sports centre as well. And it's interesting about the development of the surrounding area, because they said that they want it to be linked directly to Birmingham New Street Station. They've got this idea of electric buses going underneath all the railway lines. I mean, that, to be fair, does sound exciting. And also, the ambition for a League One club, OK, it looks like they're going to get to the Championship. But the ambition for a League One club to do that shows that this is high on the priority list of a number of teams as well.
Yeah, but ultimately it depends who's going to pay for it. So we don't know that Birmingham is a club that has a fan base of sufficient size and wealth to fund another £1 billion stadium project, which is, £1 billion now is probably 1.5 billion by the time it's built. And we are also still in a very high interest rate environment. So look, lots of these things sound great on paper. Of course, in an ideal world, what we would do is build, every city would have unbelievable facilities, underground trains from stations, and we'd all be able to get to the game, and it would, we'd all be able to get away from these stadiums very easily. But as I said to you, you still can't go past 9:30 at night from Manchester to London. So we have to figure out how people are going to get to these games. Newcastle, where is Newcastle's international fan base? How do they get to these games? We may not care about that, but you may need to care if you're trying to get 75,000 fans in, and the ticket price is £100, because you'd have to question: is there a captive audience within these locales to pay these sorts of prices? And we've talked before about ticket prices. We need to be very careful what we wish for in terms of these stadiums, or stadia, because we will get very high prices if people are investing huge amounts of money in building them.
We'll see how it all plays out. Now, to the Championship and the curious case of Blackburn Rovers. Despite being 6th in the league, in the playoff places at the moment, their manager, John Eustace, has opened negotiations to leave the club and is set to join relegation-threatened Derby County. Fans are concerned about the mismanagement of the club, which has led to financial losses, poor decision-making and the alienation of supporters, with a lot of the frustration being aimed at the club's owners, the Venkies. Joining me now is the former manager of Blackburn between 2008 and 2010. It's Big Sam Allardyce. Sam, thank you for joining the show. Just firstly, what do you make of the decision of John Eustace to leave Blackburn and join Derby County? Do you feel that it sums up the situation at Ewood Park?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's John's frustration on getting Blackburn up and around the playoff areas. But yet again, it's more about selling the players than actually buying players to strengthen their position. I said they sold Smodic in the summer, who was their leading goal scorer. They haven't really replaced him. And even though John's done a fantastic job, what are they, 6th at the moment, I think? But, and again, it looks like they'll peter out in the end because not many new players have come in to strengthen the squad, of course. And I think that's very sad for the Blackburn Rovers supporters, particularly because, you know, under Jack Walker, they were a thriving football club, won the league. And most of the fans still remember that. It's a very clear memory that they had way back a few years ago. So now seeing Blackburn Rovers, and personally my time there, I had a fantastic time keeping the club in the Premier League, got to the semi-final of the Carling Cup. And of course, since the Venky's took over, unfortunately, the club has been in decline. So it is very sad, but you know, that Blackburn have to try and continue to do their best, and hopefully, I don't know whether the Venky's are going to sell the club or not, but it certainly surprises me they still have it. They're still the owners of it.
Yeah, just in terms of your time at the club, you were there when the Venky's arrived. They eventually moved you on for Steve Keane. What were your experiences like dealing with them?
Well, only had a week, I'm afraid. So, you know, so I wasn't there that long, like I mean. So I only had a short spell, and while I was there, it was in and out and gone, like I mean. So yeah, it was very, 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 very unfortunate for me. I think that I got called in on a Sunday morning, and that was it. Didn't expect it, to be honest with you, because only a week or two into their new regime, and of course, I wasn't their man, obviously, and Steve Keane, who I was very surprised took over the club at that particular time.
What do you think the main motivations have been for the Venky's in their running of Blackburn? Is it all just profit related?
Well, I mean, apparently they were supposed to be incredibly wealthy when they joined us from India. And I think that on the basis of obviously heightening their profile worldwide is what you do when you buy a Premier League football club. Whatever business you're successful in, and however successful you are in the business, if you join a Premier League football club, it tightens your profile. Maybe that was the ultimate goal for them. But what they didn't realise is how football clubs and how complex running a Premier League football club is, and what investment is constant to be invested in the football club to keep the future positive and move forward. You cannot reduce the spending, you cannot reduce the staffing, you just have to keep increasing it all the time. The cost of a player, the cost of a contract has to be well thought out. So the infrastructure at Blackburn while I was there was probably one of the best I experienced. Unfortunately, after the Venky's arrived, that infrastructure left, and nearly all the people I worked with were gone within 12 months. And trying to build a new infrastructure is not easy. And the experience that everybody had in their department at Blackburn was one of the big positives, you know. So it's a great shame that they are where they are, but they're not far off. You know, it's not a huge amount of investment, I would say, to try and get in the Premier League again, because we've seen Burnley do it, we've seen Luton do it, you know, we've seen Ipswich do it, you know, and they're smallish clubs like Blackburn are at the moment, so it can be done with the right infrastructure.
Sam, good to see you. You mentioned there that Blackburn are not that far off. They're 6th at the time of recording in the Championship, and yet John Eustace chooses to join Derby County, who are fighting relegation, and that's off the back of John Darrell Thomason also leaving the club due to similar disagreements with the Venky's and the club's strategy. That's pretty damning, isn't it, for Blackburn Rovers to be losing a manager fighting for promotion to the Premier League to a side that could get relegated to League One?
Yes, I think that it tells its own story. I mean, he's saying to the club, I'd sooner prefer to go and work at Derby County, even though they're in that position. And if he is speaking to Derby County, they must be attracting him by the support he's going to get that he's perhaps not receiving at Blackburn Rovers. So, and he thinks he can take Derby forward very quickly and get them in a position to get promoted, of course. So that's the only reason I can think behind it. When you're moving to a football club, it's the size of the club, but also it's the people you're working with. That's the most important decision you make. Can you work with them? Do we all work together? Are we all pulling in the same direction? You know, and getting that that infrastructure and getting that contract right and all pulling in the same direction is a big ask in football today, because obviously many people work in football, sometimes, not always, for the better of the club or the better of the team itself.
Sam, I know you're sunning it up in Spain at the moment. You were spotted with Fergie the other week as well. Just wondering about you and your future. Are you going to be planning to head back into management at all?
Only if I get the call to somebody said, Sam, would you be interested in helping us and developing us, moving in the right direction? I'd speak to them obviously and see where it went from there. As in active, I don't ring up and ask for every job that comes available, but somebody, if they are willing to take an old experienced guy on like me now, then you never know. Never say never, they say.
Brilliant. Sam, thank you very much indeed, and enjoy the rest of your time in Spain as well. Sam Allardyce there, the former Blackburn Rovers manager in 2008 and 2010. Stefan, just very quickly, fans are going to plan protests for the upcoming game against West Brom. There has been talk of an independent regulator coming into football. Is this exactly the kind of situation where that would be able to counteract what's going on at Blackburn?
I suspect probably not, actually. I think it would be a little bit too political for regulators to get involved in a situation where there wasn't an immediate insolvency issue that we can see. I mean, there are issues with the Venky's, but it doesn't look like they're an immediate financial crisis. I don't think it's clear that those owners are no longer fit and proper. So I suspect actually the regulator wouldn't be able to get involved in what looks like a situation where the fans might not be as happy as they would like to be, but there's no tangible reason for a regulator to intervene. Look, Blackburn have got issues, not just in terms of management and everything else, but often in these sorts of situations when they look across the road and see what's happening up the road at Burnley, for example, that exacerbates the situation. And so, you get the sorts of protests that you get. The reality is that for everything we want to say about the Venky's as owners, over their time in ownership, over the last, I don't know, maybe 10 years it's been, they put in over £180 million of money into the club. The club is losing on an annual basis over £20 million before at the EBITDA level. So, it's not a club that's going to look particularly attractive to the outside world, and nor can fans really say that the Venky's haven't put a lot of money in so far. Now, it's not gone well, clearly, but it has been an expensive investment for the Venky's.
Now, last month, Naomi Girma became the first ever $1 million women's player when she moved to Chelsea from San Diego Wave. Yet while Chelsea have been splashing the cash of late, they are still a way off being the most valuable women's sports team in the world. That title lies with Angel City FC, an LA-based club founded less than 5 years ago, but with A-list celebrity backing and a $250 million takeover by Disney CEO Bob Iger last year. Could the team soon set the pace for the future of women's football? Well, earlier I sat down with the president and co-founder Julie Uhrman in an exclusive interview to find out, and I started by asking her about how those superstar endorsements helped set up the club.
The way we wanted to build it had never been done before. Using sports as a platform to drive to equity, building a women's professional soccer club in LA, which is really the sports capital of the world, where there are 11 professional sports teams, 2 men's soccer clubs, and the beach and the mountains. And so it was really difficult for us to get people to sign on, to people to invest in this idea. In 2019, there wasn't a lot of media coverage on women's sports. It was less than 3%. There was no national broadcast deal. So at the time, we weren't on ESPN and CBS and Amazon Prime. And so nobody felt that there was a real business model around women's sports. And when we were trying to raise money, the individuals who believed in our story, that where it resonated, that we could build an organization where mission and capital could coexist, were celebrities and athletes who know how to utilize their platform to push forward their social initiatives, but also to push forward their business initiatives, whether they're an athlete or, an actress or producer focusing on their next project. So we got our first yes from Eva Longoria, and then we realized that we were just talking to the wrong people. And to your point, we launched with something like 60 investors: Eva Longoria, Jessica Chastain, Jennifer Gardner, Sophia Bush. We also had 14 former U.S. women's national team players: Julie Foudy, Mia Hamm, Abby Wambach, and of course, the great Billie Jean King and Alana Kloss. And being able to leverage their platform and their voice to tell our story, why it was different and why people should be excited about Angel City, absolutely made a difference when we were bringing Angel City to life.
And what's amazing is, if you then fast forward to last year, the club's $250 million sale was very widely publicised. How do you feel that that huge investment is going to help Angel to kick on and hopefully, in your case, dominate?
Yeah, look, it's an incredible benchmark for women's sports that tells the story that women's sports are valuable. If you invest in the game day experience, in the community, in the product, on the pitch, in the players, there's real revenue to drive. We did it uniquely. We talk about this organization where mission and capital can coexist. And so 10% of our sponsorship dollars goes back into the community. We've committed $3.9 million back into the community. We're generating over $35 million a year in revenue because we're valuing this product and these players and this community and this city.
And Julie, you said in January 2023 that you wanted to be the first $1 billion women's team within the next 5 years. Do you feel as if you're on track for that at the moment?
I mean, we're 25% of the way there. So yeah, I feel great about it. We've been incredibly successful off the pitch. We are focused entirely on being successful on the pitch and been making a lot of moves in the offseason to do that, including the hiring of our first sporting director, Mark Parsons, who knows winning from his time at the Portland Thorns. We also opened our performance center, which is the largest dedicated performance center in the National Women's Soccer League, at over 50,000 square feet, a pitch and a half, and all of the features and functionality and equipment that our players to be successful, to really drive home what a high performance center looks like, and to remove all the questions and all the excuses from players to be their best. So when our on-field performance matches our off-field performance, I think we're going to be the first $1 billion club, and it's not going to take very long.
And if we talk more generally about women's football and its growth as well, in 2024 it was a record $15.6 million spent on women's transfer fees. That was more than double the figure for 2023. Yeah. We saw Naomi Girma move to Chelsea from San Diego Wave for $1.1 million, breaking that record. Are we about to see a point where the game rapidly develops in terms of everything going on off the field?
Absolutely. I think transfer market is going to continue to double every single year for the next couple of years. Because what we're seeing is the value that these players have on the product of the game. Chelsea picked up Guillermo because they want to win, right? They want to get into the Champions League finals and they want to win the Champions League. Imagine what's going to happen when you start to value the off-field value of these players as much as you value the on-field performance. You're going to see that transfer fee grow. The second thing that I think is accelerating the growth of the transfer market really is the idea that great players are coming from everywhere. And I think we saw that in the World Cup this past 2 years ago, and then in the Olympics last year, which is you're seeing incredible talent in Brazil, in Colombia, in Africa. It's not just the US, it's not just the UK, it's not just Spain. And as we get the exposure of these incredible athletes from different national teams and different clubs around the world, their value is going to increase. We've seen that already start to begin. Before Guillermo, Barbara Banda, I think, had the highest transfer fee at north of $750,000. And these aren't one-off anomalies anymore. We're going to see them more and more.
And in your opinion, what do you think clubs need to do to get to that level of dominance like we've seen with the likes of Barcelona and Lyon over in Europe?
I think it's really simple. You need to have sellout crowds. You want to have a fan base that's excited about your team, that are there to cheer them on year in, year out. We play at BMO Stadium, which seats 22,000 fans. We have on average 6 sellouts a year with an average of 20,000 fans per game. I think that's important for the growth of the game. And I think it's incredible for the players to be able to play in front of a large crowd, not once or twice a year, but every single game of the year. I think that's one. The second is off the field, having that high performance center for the players where they have all the equipment they need to be successful, not only in training, but also in recovery. And so when you have a club that has the community and the on-field entertainment and excitement and passion in the stadium, combined with the incredible staff that is deep in coaching and performance and medical that can support these players holistically, and a performance center that allows them to be their very best, you're going to see players want to go to those clubs.
And in your eyes, Julie, what do you think the financial future holds for women's football?
Look, I don't think we're going to be the only club that's going to be $1 billion valuation, right? It's always sort of interesting to me how when you run a men's club or when you think about investing in a men's club, no one ever thinks about break even or profitability, or at least it's not a near-term goal. And for some reason in women's sports, it's a near-term goal right away. They want to invest $1 and they want to get $1 back, or $1.20 back right away. I think what's changing is the understanding that if you invest in this product and the players, the revenue is going to come. You are going to build big stars that are either going to deliver for you from merchandising perspective or ticketing perspective, or if you're near Magurma, you're going to get $1 million transfer fee. So there is real return on investment that I think everyone is finally waking up to in women's football. And the more of us that invest, the faster that curve is going to be as far as value for the clubs and value for these players.
And we've got about a month to go then till the NWSL season kicks off again. What do you think the realistic goal is for Angel City this season?
Oh, I mean, my goal is always to win the championship. So that is where we always think about. But we're really excited about hosting a home playoff game. I think that's a big stretch goal for us, not only to make the playoffs, but to be one of the top 4 teams. There is great competition in this league. You have teams like Orlando, Pride, Kansas City Current, even the Washington Spirit that are really strong and are continue to be strong. I believe this is the most competitive domestic league in the world. Any given Sunday, we say somebody can win, and we're feeling really confident about how we're entering the season this year.
And just finally, Julie, I'm not sure how much you can tell me about this, but it was reported last month your business partner and co-founder Cara Nortman was planning to buy a stake in Chelsea's women's team. Is there any truth in that?
I definitely can't comment on that, but I can tell you any club that Cara Nortman gets involved in is lucky to have her. She has been a huge proponent for women's sports for a long time, and the idea child behind Angel City with Natalie Portman. So if there's any truth to that statement, Chelsea's going to be really lucky.
Julie, thank you very much indeed. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me.
That's it from us this week on How Football Works. If you want to get involved, post your comments below. And remember, you can watch and listen to the show on Spotify as well. Thank you very much for your company. And thanks to our panellists, Stefan Borson and Ben Jacobs. And also to our guest, Julie Uhrman. And of course, Big Sam live from Spain. See you next time.